Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli. Welcome to another episode of Audio Signals podcast. I don't know, I already done like 2 today, so I feel like I'm playing a tape right now. So let me see what I should say. Yes, Audio Signals is exactly what it sounds like, and we're trying to capture signals, although, we're not going analog nowadays, it's all digital, but I repositioned this fictitious antenna to capture news stories. And for those of you that have been following me for a while, I made a little twist and I focus on stories and storytelling and storytellers, because stories come from people. Stories are made to educate and are, as I usually say, we are made of stories. Even when we don't mean to say stories, we actually do. Even the way we act, the way we move, the way we dress, we're our own story. Now, there are certain situations where you may think a little bit more of a story in the standard way to think about a story. Usually it's a book, it's a movie, it's a radio show, a drama, as they used to do, and now we do podcasts, dramatized podcasts. So now that's the new radio show drama that used to be back in the days. But when you talk about books, you really think about stories. And today we're going to talk with a friend of mine, part of the Mentor Project, that wrote quite a few books. He's a physicist and astronomer. His name is Neil Comins. And for those watching, as I usually say, you've already seen him. He's right there. And for those listening, I'm not lying to you. He's right here. So we're going to hear his voice. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Marco.
Good. We've been trying to do this for a while, and I'm so happy because we see each other quite a bit, once a week usually with our meetings. And I've always been curious to ask you a few questions, so I hope you don't mind.
That's what I'm here for.
There you go. Well, I'm going to start with the easiest one, which is, who is Neil? I know you've done a lot of things, but give us a little background about yourself.
Okay, sure. I am an astrophysicist, technically speaking. I got my undergraduate degree at Cornell, my PhD at what was then called University College, Cardiff, Wales. And my PhD was in the area of general relativity. And I was very fortunate to have a very good advisor. And we published a number of papers. And one of those papers was actually cited in a Nobel Prize lecture back in 1983. And so I, since then, have been at the University of Maine. And the backstory for that is that I grew up in New York, in the city and in Westchester County. And back in those days, it was a very rough area, especially when I take the subway into Brooklyn. It wasn't a question of, are you going to get robbed or mugged? It was when. And I didn't want to bring, and I was. And I didn't want to bring my kids up in that environment. Don't get me wrong. I know it's changed, of course. Mm-hmm. But back in the late 70s, I opted to come to the University of Maine. And I have been teaching here ever since. One cute story is that after I got my PhD and people started calling me doctor, I felt very insecure. I felt insecure because I had no medical experience or background whatsoever. So to overcome that insecurity, I became an EMT. And I worked for 10 years as an EMT here in Orono, Maine. Very satisfying experience. And that actually led, when I was flying back from Japan one year, back in the 2000s, a woman died on the airplane, and they said, well, if there's a doctor on the plane, would you please come to the back of the aircraft? I know the Good Samaritan law, so I went back there, and she was dead. And to make a long story short, she walked off the plane, gave me a hug in front of my wife, but that was fine, gave me a hug, and that was payment in full. So becoming an EMT was a very satisfying experience for me. I have moved on to doing computer simulations, and specifically I'm interested in galaxies like our Milky Way and how they evolve, and things like colliding. It turns out the Andromeda Galaxy, which you can see with the naked eye if your eyes are good, is going to collide with the Milky Way billions of years from now. So anyways, it's a very interesting thing. And then I started writing books. And the backstory for that, and please stop me at any time.
Oh, go. You're making it easy for me. So
the backstory for that was that when my son James was, maybe 2 years old, he was asking questions like, what that? He wanted to know the names of things. And then he graduated by the age of 4 to asking why. And if you have had young kids, why? And I did my best to answer. Age 5, he graduated from there to asking what if questions. Like, what if the sun came up in the other direction? Things like that. And I did my best to answer those. Anyways, one day I was sitting in my office here. You can see the background. And my colleague, Dave Batuski, walked in and he said, and I quote, we scientists think about the world too much the same, which isn't very good English, but never mind. So I said, okay, let's think about it differently. And my son's what if questions came to mind. And I grabbed the first what if question I could think of, which was, what if the moon didn't exist? And he and I discussed it for a few minutes, and I was hooked. I started writing, papers that were published in Astronomy magazine, asking and exploring many what if questions. And that led to my first book called What If the Moon Didn't Exist, which has actually 10 what if scenarios in it.
Well, I'm actually going to stop you right there, because the what if, I feel like is the core of us being human, right? So talking about storytelling, like I love how your son didn't start it with a what if when he was younger. He had to, you say, graduate to that,
Yes,
right?
right.
Like it's kind of like your brain needs to start maturing in a certain way, and then I feel like that what if question applies to everything. That's why, give you an example. When I talk about cybersecurity, I talk about hacking a lot. And hacking is perceived as a bad thing. And I said, no, hacking is a really good thing. It's cybercrime that is bad. But hacking is exactly that. What if I take this system and I make it work in a way that it wasn't intentional, and it does? Or what if I can do this? What if I can do that? And then you just go for that. And I think the same applies when you do creative stuff. What if I present it this way? So it's literally the question at the core of a lot of things that we do as human. If we didn't ask that question, we wouldn't progress.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well done. That was great. So I wrote my first book, and then I was using a textbook in teaching introductory astronomy, and the author of it died suddenly, and I offered to take it over, to write it. And so my second book was actually an astronomy textbook called Discovering the Universe. And to say the least, it did very well. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
And then I wrote a second what if book, and many more editions of the textbooks. And then I started asking questions about misconceptions people have about the natural world. That became my next theme. was to identify misconceptions, identify why we have them, how to overcome them. And I wrote a book about that called Heavenly Errors. And I incorporate misconceptions when I teach, and I incorporate them in my textbooks now. And I also wrote 2 books about traveling in space, if you want to go as a tourist, what to expect. And so those are the kinds of things I've been doing, and we're now 21 books into the story.
Now here we go into the story. So the story and the meaning of storytelling. So you create this scenario, and that alone is, even if you do it, you talk about a science. Many people think about science as, math and mathematics and formulas, but actually, when you understand things, correct me if I'm wrong, but Einstein itself, he was a very creative person, a very creative mind. Like, he could visualize his theory, right? I'm actually reading his biography now. That's why it comes in my mind. So the importance of telling the right story to appeal, and this could be to teaching, this could be to bringing new generation in STEM. I mean, it's not just by the math that you do this. So how did you develop your style? Is it anything to do with your teaching, and then you applied it in your book? What's your way to tell the story?
That is a terrific question, and the answer, I think, is very important. It's interesting because I give talks all around the country and so on, and people come up to me and say, "Well, how do you do that?" I mean, because I'm talking about science things, just using words, and they get it. Right. And I see the smiles on their face. Anyways, the answer to your question is, whenever I am talking, like lecturing to my students or writing my books, half of my brain is sitting there watching or listening to me with the perspective of the audience. So when I'm writing, I'm also reading. And to me, it's very, very important to make sure that with the mindset I expect that my normal audience would have, they understand, appreciate, and enjoy what they're reading from me. So that's the number one takeaway is to when I do any of these kinds of things, I'm there in 2 different worlds, so to speak, and that's how I try to make my work accessible to people.
And I think that's really important, because many times when people know a lot about something, they expect everybody else knows a lot about something, and that's how we disconnect with the audience. So knowing who your audience is, it definitely is important. And do you test with your students too? Like, you come up with the idea and say, this could be a good story. Let's see how they react before you put it on paper.
An interesting question. The short answer is no. When I'm looking for another thing to write about or another what if, I tend to wander about in whatever realm that's in by myself and ask myself what if questions until one sort of resonates. And once I've got something that has an aha moment to it, then I'm off and running.
Right. I love it. So what if the moon didn't exist? You want to tell us a few things about that? And also, what if you didn't have a character made in Japan based on you? What if?
Maybe I should explain that first.
Yes, because I don't know. So, I'm cheating. I already know the story a little bit.
Fair enough. Okay, so, in 2003, I got a cold call from a major movie production studio in Japan called Robot Inc. And they said that there is going to be in 2005 a World Expo. Back in the early days, in the olden days, they had world's fairs And I went to the 1964 World Fair in New York, and 1967 World Fair up in Canada, and so on. And at these fairs, every individual and every company and country has an individual pavilion based on a theme of their choice. And for example, back in '64, Ford's pavilion theme was Mustang, because the Mustang just came out. So we sat in cars in their pavilion and rode around in Mustangs to get us interested. Anyways, so the cold call that I got was, there's going to be a World Expo in 2005 in Aichi, Japan, and Mitsubishi Corporation is interested in considering your What If book as the theme of their pavilion. So instead of Mustangs, they had, and so I talked with the fellow, and we batted some ideas back and forth, and I put together a proposal, and they bought it. And it was interesting because this was back in 2005, before VR, virtual reality, came into existence. And so the show, based on What If the Moon Didn't Exist, was essentially a total immersion. In other words, there were screens on all sides of the viewers, and there were projections of activities on all sides, so that they felt as if they were immersed in the environment. So, which was a very neat thing to do. And very briefly, the story was to explore the consequence of this, because the moon, I might add, is very, very important in Japanese culture. That was what got me that far. And so they decided to have a presentation by me as a cartoon character. And I will give credit where credit is due. My wife chose what I was to look like. They sent us about a half a dozen sketches of what the character was going to look like, and she chose the one that I am today. Anyway, so we went to the opening of that, and it was a wonderful experience. It was a 1-year thing. The World Expos are 1 year long, and when it closed, a resort in southern Japan, Haus ten Bosch, House in the Forest in Dutch, came to me and said, we would like to, through Robot Inc., to give credit, we would like to buy the rights to your show. And I said, yeah, all right, force me. And they forced me. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I helped them put together, a slightly revised version. But anyways, that show played every day, almost every day, for 17 years at the resort Haus ten Bosch, and just closed down for last year. So for the last 17, 18 years, if you include Mitsubishi, I've been a cartoon character in Japan. So,
and how does it feel to be a cartoon?
It's very satisfying, I assure you. And so now on to What If the Moon Didn't Exist. The premise is that the moon never existed. That's what I'm constructing here. And it turns out in real life, in fact, when I give this presentation, I talk about the consequences of the moon as it has been. In other words, not as it wouldn't be, but as it has been. And then you take away all of these things and you see how profoundly different the Earth would be. For example, when the moon first formed, we don't know exactly, but in round numbers, it was about 10 times closer than it is today. And as a result, the tides it created on the young Earth were, are you ready for this, 1,000 times higher than they are now.
Wow. So 10 times closer, but 1,000 bigger the tide because of the influence.
Because of the force of gravity.
Yeah.
10 times 10 times 10.
Wow.
And therefore, like, in in Maine here, where the tides can be, say, 20 feet high, they would be 20,000 feet high if Maine had existed back then.
Wow.
Which would ruin your whole day if you were here in Maine. Anyways, the point is that had a huge consequence for life on Earth. Specifically, those huge tides running in and out. And I'm sorry, I should also say that the Earth was spinning faster. Again, we don't know how fast, but maybe as fast as 4 times faster than it is today, 6-hour day-ish. And with the tides running in and out every 6 hours, the amount of the surface of the young continents that was scraped by those tides and that debris put into the ocean really sped up the ability of life to form in the oceans, because the building blocks were deposited as a result of those tides. So that was one of the major factors. Another factor is the Earth was spinning so fast that the high tide, and there are 2 high tides on Earth, one on the side of the moon, one on the other side. The high tide on the side of the Earth closer to the moon was actually ahead. The Earth was spinning so fast that if this was the moon and this was the Earth with a high tide, the high tide is ahead of the moon, and this water here, has gravity, and the gravity of the water is pulling the moon, like a ball on a string. If you have a ball on a string, you start spinning around, the ball will spiral outward. That's exactly what the moon is doing. The moon is spiraling away from the Earth as a result of the tides the moon, creates on the Earth. And in fact, I mean, one of the things that I'm often asked, well, is it ever going to leave the Earth, the moon? And the answer is no. Because at the same time that the moon is spiraling away, the Earth is slowing down. Why? Because the Earth is giving the moon energy to spiral away. It's like you would give the ball on the string energy by spinning around. And that energy has to come from somewhere. And the energy that the moon gets from the gravity of the high tides comes from the Earth's rotation, because the high tides are trying to get back onto the moon. And then as that high tide water moves westward, and it bumps into these nasty continents. And as the water bumps into the continents, it slows the Earth down. So the Earth, going from, let's say, 6 hours back then to 24 hours now, it continues to slow. Eventually, the punchline is the moon is going to be much farther away, but the Earth will be spinning at the same rate that the moon is orbiting. And from then on, the high tide here and the moon will be lined up, and therefore there won't be any more pull from the high tide on the moon. So that's going to happen, and it's going to be billions and billions of years from now, so don't worry about it. The sun is going to blow up before then anyway, so no big deal.
No big deal. So the point is, if the moon didn't exist, all these things that you described,
very good,
phenomenon would not happen. So in simple world, it may even be that we didn't have life.
Good.
I'm making a guess. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, life would almost certainly have evolved, but the main source of the minerals in the ocean that life evolved from would come from river runoff and from the sources of heat and energy coming out of the bottom of the ocean in some places. But if you add up all of those minerals compared to the minerals that the high tides made, it would have taken millions of years longer, at least, for life to have evolved, number one. And another thing is that the rotation of the Earth would be, close to what it was back then. And the reason I say close is because the sun today creates 1/3 of our tides. And therefore, there would have been a little slowing. But, the day would be, let's say, 8 hours long, not 24, if the moon had never existed. And as a result of that, you can then look at the wind patterns from the heating and cooling of the rapidly spinning Earth, and you would get completely different weather patterns than we have today. And from most of what I've been able to figure out, they would be much nastier weather than we have now.
Wow. See, this is the typical example of how you made it very easy to understand. Given I like space, I read and I'm passionate about it, but I'm far away from that. I'm a doctor in political science, so don't call me for help on a plane. But I'm passionate about a lot of different things. But of course, then I hear you, and I'm like, Eric, I mean, you just made it so easy to understand, I think, for everyone. But also, as you're doing this, and I'm going to reconnect to the storytelling, I've asked myself a lot of questions, and I had a lot of scenario that could inspire very easily a ton of sci-fi movies. And I'm connecting to the fact that you've been consulting, if I'm not wrong, with many TV and radio science shows. So we know that some book and stories and movie are based on completely fictional world. I mean, Tolkien created an entire Middle Earth, and you can't go and tell him that cannot exist, because it's like, no, yeah, it can, because I want it to exist. But other times you try to play with the real science, you try to play with real history, maybe you have an alternative history, fiction, and so forth. So what is your relationship with very creative mind that maybe want to create and go away too far from reality? I mean, are you a fan of complete fantasy, or your science background always brings you back to that's too much? No, calm down.
Absolutely. No, that's a really great question. The short answer is that when it gets too far away, I put on the brakes. In other words, I try to make it so the science fiction, if you will, that I have been asked about. I try to make it as realistic as possible, and sometimes that takes people in different directions. But when it gets to be complete fantasy, and don't get me wrong, that's a nice genre. It's not where I am interested in being. So I try to sort of stay close enough to science so that when people hear or see things, they would say, I wonder, rather than, oh, no, that's not it. That's not the real thing.
So if I want to go to space, and I have, on one hand, I'm at the bookstore, and I have the Traveler's Guide to Space, which you wrote, and I have the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy from Adams. Which one should I get?
Well, I would say the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the only problem with that, I honestly don't recall that I named it. I think my agent named it. Unfortunately, the Hitchhiker's Guide to Space, when people see it, they think, oh, it's going to be like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or the universe, whatever.
And it's not.
And it's not. And it's not.
Well, that's why I made the joke.
Yeah.
One is a little bit off in a lot of way. I think it's super funny, especially when he's bred.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, most certainly very detached from reality, from science.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
But still enjoyable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is your next adventure in terms of writing? Do you have any other plan? And also, have you ever thought about writing something that is, I mean, I guess you already answered to that, but a little bit more of a fictional story?
Funny you should ask that question. It's not that you were prompt. I mean, give you credit for coming up with that by yourself. I'm working on 2 projects right now. One of them is a memoir, and there's a deep background in that. But I am exploring, my early years and why I had them and what I did and what I got out of it. And I've been encouraged to do that by a number of people. And the other is science fiction. I'm writing a science fiction novel taking place around numbers 100 years from now, with a minimum amount of fiction built in, but some, specifically to enable the players in the story to be able to travel faster than the speed of light. But I do it in such a way that it's not implausible that this could exist. It would take it would take science a while to make changes in the state of our technology, and if they can make those changes, then conceivably, this could happen. So it's on the boundary between science and science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my two projects right now.
And I didn't know. I swear, I wasn't prompted on this, so I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah.
I would like to end this with something about maybe your habits or your taste in reading and maybe watching movies. So, as a scientist, as a writer of things that are very connected to reality to a certain point, now they're going on that adventure as well, that journey.
Right.
What's your favorite genre? I mean, as a professor, as an astrophysics, do you just people imagine that you just read about that, but I'm sure that you may enjoy something else. Maybe, I don't know, you watch Disney. What do you do on your free time? What's your favorite story?
If I had free time, I would.
If I had, question again, an if question.
Right. What if I had free time?
Yeah.
No, the realm that I like reading in most, when it's not hard science, is the history of scientists, the history of Einstein, the history of Niels Bohr, the history of Isaac Newton, and so on and so forth. It's just interesting to see, where they came from and how they got to where they ended up. I find that very interesting because, quite honestly, in some cases, it could potentially help move me forward. So that is one of my major areas or genres, other than the hard science. I also read books or materials by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh yeah, I love that.
We met 1994 on a bus in San Diego. This gentleman comes up to me and he says, "Excuse me, are you Neil Comins?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Hello, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson. Nice to meet you." And we've been friends ever since. So,
I love it. Well, he's definitely one of those that inspire me. I love his shows. I when I scroll through Instagram, often, Instagram knows me better than myself. Once you start watching a few things, he knows you play the bass and that you like Neil deGrasse Tyson quotes on the astronomy. So he's another one of those person another guy, professional like you, that just breaks it down, right? It makes it interesting. He's an excellent storyteller, and so are you. And there is another guy. I don't remember his first name. He's Cox is his last name. He's from the UK. He's also in astrophysics, and he had a show, and same thing, like kind of the same style, a little bit more rock and roll looking type of guy. I think actually used to sing in a band or something. But anyway, again, it doesn't have to be boring, and that's the difference, right? When you look at that. And one last note on the biography, I didn't grow up reading biography, but I got really interested in that, and especially Isaacson biography on Einstein, which is the one I'm actually reading now, the one on Steve Jobs, the one on Leonardo da Vinci, which is excellent. And it just makes you contextualize things when to do what they could with what they had. Right? They didn't have computer. They didn't have all the data, the now generative AI and all that. But their head was so ahead of the time that probably a lot of people thought they were a little nuts, to be honest.
Fair enough. One last cute thing. I was approached concerning in the realm of what if the moon didn't exist. I was approached by a fellow at the University of Illinois, Chad Lane, who asked if I would work with him to get an NSF grant to incorporate my what if scenarios into, you ready for this, Minecraft.
I can see that.
We have been doing that for several years now, and also creating versions of Minecraft with exoplanet properties, and that's been doing very well. It's well received, shall we say?
I love it. See, I'm telling you, what if is the question, and what if I had this entire conversation without Neil next to me? It would have been damn boring, but it wasn't. So, Neil, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Again, I know you're super busy, and I'm excited for all your upcoming project. And door is open. Anytime you have a new story, I enjoy listening. I'm quite sure the audience did the same. So I will put all the links to your books and way to get in touch with you on the notes on the podcast or YouTube if you're watching us there. And subscribe to Audio Signal Podcast so you can get more story like this. There's a bunch coming up. And Neil, again, anytime, come back. Good luck with your new venture. And I think I have to read that If the Moon Didn't Exist. So I'm gonna go get it on Amazon. I'm sure I will. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Neil. Talk to you soon. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.